Okay, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are pleased to welcome you to the first installment of a three-part webinar series on the newly released Volumetric Water Benefit Accounting Guidance 2.0. My name is Mark Detman, and I'm with the water team at the World Resources Institute. I'll be joined today by our colleagues from Limnotech, Blue Risk, Bonneville Environmental Foundation, who have been tremendous partners in the development of this guidance. The goal for today's session is to increase understanding and awareness of the VWBA 2.0 guidance. We hope that you all here will view, use, and share it across your networks, because the real magic happens when more people use it, discuss it, and find ways to improve it. Our objective throughout the webinar series is to introduce the new guidance and dive deeper into the application of VWBA 2.0. And yes, we will get a little technical, but not too technical. Following a brief overview of the guidance, what it is, how it came together, I will pass it over to our colleagues from Blue Risk and Limnotech, who will walk us through the application of steps 1 and 2. As I mentioned, VWBA 2.0 was a collective effort building on decades of insights from on-the-ground application of the first VWBA. Our teams from Limnotech, Blue Risk, Bonneville Environmental Foundation, and WRI will be guiding you through the 6-step application throughout the webinar series, and will be available for further discussion. We also would like to recognize that VWBA 2.0 guidance was made possible thanks to the support of 14 corporate partners. Following the examples of steps 1 and 2, we will open up to discussion to questions from the audience. Before we dive in, I want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items so you know how things will run. First, we have a lot of content to cover during this webinar series. So in the interest of time, only the panel speakers will be on audio and video. So if you can't unmute yourself, that's totally normal. If you have a question at any point, the best place to put it is in the Q&A box on your Zoom screen. Feel free to type your question in as we go along. You don't have to wait until the end. You can also give a little thumbs up or upvote to other questions you like. We are recording today's session, and we'll send you the recording and the slides afterwards, so no worries if you miss anything. And finally, if you run into any technical difficulties, please drop a note into the chat to the host, and we will do our best to help you out. Excellent, that's it, and let's begin. VWBA 2.0 provides corporate practitioners and project implementers with a clearly defined 6-step approach for identifying water stewardship activities and quantifying, tracking, and communicating their volumetric water benefits. Since 1.0 was released in 2019, the scale and complexity of shared water challenges has intensified. Whether it's reading the latest scientific report, talking with our local teams and partners around the world, or reading local news stories, we are increasingly aware of the diversity of these water challenges and what is at risk if we don't act. However, I am optimistic that we can embrace and navigate that complexity together. And this evidence comes from the evolution we are witnessing across the water stewardship space. Ambition is increasing, scope is expanding, innovation is growing, and collaboration is becoming more contagious as many companies are moving beyond water commitments and towards implementation of their volumetric water strategies. With this growing complexity, there's been an increasing demand for expanded standardized guidance. In response, 14 companies supported a core project group to incorporate decades of experience and industry best practice to develop VWBA 2.0. VWBA 2.0 offers voluntary, principle-based, and non-prescriptive guidance to help determine indicators, methods, and attribution plans that can be used to effectively quantify, track, report, and communicate the VWBs of water stewardship activities. This guidance is designed for companies and water stewardship practitioners seeking to make consistent, credible, volumetric water benefit claims. I will also note that VWBA 2.0 guidance is being translated into Spanish and Chinese as well, and these versions will be available across our partner websites soon. So what is new and what is different? VWBA 2.0 builds on the first version with enhanced programmatic guidance following a 6-step process. Paul will touch on step 1, which emphasizes the importance of understanding the social, ecological, technical systems and their interrelated impacts on the basin. Laura will describe step 2 in more detail, which highlights the 6 essential criteria and 10 optional criteria for project selection. Step 3 offers expanded technical guidance with foundational principles and updated quantification methods. This includes 6 new volumetric water benefit indicators and 3 new methods. Step 4 offers guidance for tracking requirements to claim volumetric water benefits and key considerations for agreements such as project duration, track and reporting frequency, and developing a tracking and reporting plan. Step 5 offers guidance on what to do when a project starts and how to track its status. Finally, step 6 offers guidance for claiming volumetric water benefits, including when to claim, how long to claim, and when to stop making claims. By using a common unit, VWBA 2.0 makes it possible to compare and aggregate volumetric water benefits across activities and value chains. Before we dive deeper into the steps, I wanted to zoom out and note that volumetric water benefits represent outputs, not the broader social, economic, or environmental outcomes that may result from water stewardship activities. Volume is only one dimension of water stewardship activities, and volumetric water benefits should not be the only metric used to inform decisions or assess impact. I will now pass it over to Paul Rieg, who is the founder and CEO of Blue Risk, and Laura Weintraub, Vice President at Limnotech, who will guide us through the application of VWBA 2.0. Paul, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, like Mark just mentioned, if you stay there, the updated guidance had outlines 6 steps that practitioners can follow, not only to quantify benefits, but to really start by understanding kind of that local catchment context. What are the drivers and priorities within the watershed of interest? To then identify potential activities and project partners, to then quantify the benefits. And then once you have an idea of the potential outputs of these projects, to pursue the project through agreeing with your project partners, to then implementing and confirming and preparing the benefit quantification. So these are the 6 steps. As I mentioned, Mark walked through them, and today we're going to cover steps 1 and 2 in a bit more detail to give you a sense of what's covered in the updated guidance. So if you go to the next slide, Mark. Yes, step 1. So like so many things in the context of water, it all starts by really understanding the local catchment context, right? And what we want to do in step 1 is understand the boundaries of the watershed where you want to have an intervention, and thinking not just about the physical conditions, but also the social and governance context. That's going to help and enable you to understand within those boundaries what are the potential shared challenges, right, that a project could address, as well as the company interactions with water in the catchment. And that's important because most of these restoration activities or replenishment activities that VWBA 2.0 is used to quantify are tied to a company's program within a basin. So you want to think about, okay, what's the presence of the company? What are they trying to achieve in the basin? And then in that area, what are the shared challenges that the project could contribute to? Fully recognizing that it's not always possible, but whenever you can, we found that it's extremely helpful to engage relevant parties within the basin or within the watershed that have experience working on water, to consider their values, their priorities, their points of view as well, when understanding that basin context. And then lastly, given that there are a number of initiatives oftentimes already in place, as you set out to understand the basin context, think about trying to identify existing efforts, existing water stewardship or restoration projects or initiatives that may be ongoing that you could potentially contribute to or complement with whatever work you're planning to do. So that's kind of all part of step one. The guidance articulates all of this. We've seen it be very helpful as part of step one to take all of this and then take a step back and try to define some objectives for your organization in that basin based on your interactions with the basin, the priorities, the values of stakeholders and other interested parties to really help guide that decision-making process that we're going to get into in step two. Doing all of this is really important because it's going to enable you to identify projects and partners that are most relevant in that local context and therefore that are going to deliver most value to the catchment and its relevant parties. So all of this, it's really important not just to understand the context, but to do so so that it enables the right selection of projects and partners later on. So kind of step one is really foundational to all the other steps. And you'll see throughout the rest of this webinar and the other webinars that we're going to keep going back to this around really, making sure that we understand the local context and shared water challenges in the area that the projects are carried out. So if we go to the next step or the next slide, Mark, we wanted to provide an example. So, if you're an organization and you say you have a facility in Mexico City, you can see the map there, and there's a star kind of within the city boundaries, and you're looking to do a restoration activity. In step one, you'd want to ask yourself, what are the boundaries of the watershed? Kind of what are those physical, social, and governance characteristics? What are your interactions as a company in the basin? And then based on all that, what are some shared challenges that a project could aim to address? In the case of Mexico, if you have a plant in the city, the city draws water from the local aquifer underneath the city of Mexico, but it also has water that's coming in through infrastructure from two other basins, the Lerma Basin and then the Cutzamala Basin. So in the map here on the left-hand side, you could see where those are relative to the city, right? And then once you understand kind of your interactions with these watersheds, your dependency on them, you'd want to think about not just the boundaries, but what are some of the challenges. And, maybe, you start with looking at some publicly available information from the water authority like Conagua. They have some really good information on water quality and water availability challenges across basins in Mexico. You could look also at information available from other groups like WRI and the aqueduct tools. Just for the purpose of today, we have two different data layers pulled up just to give you a sense of what some of the challenges may be. And for example, in that top image on the right, that's a map looking at water quality challenges, specifically non-point source pollution challenges in these basins. And you can see the different colors. Red meaning, higher degree of issues and challenges, and the yellow kind of lower level of challenges. And you can see how in the Cutzamala Basin, non-point source pollution is really something that's an issue in that basin with that red color, more so than the Lerma. And then if you look at the map underneath, that's a map of water stress, and it's kind of reversed, right? In the case of water availability, the Lerma Basin is much more challenged with water availability than compared to the Cutzamala. So we start to see that in the two external basins that you depend on, there may be different priorities and different challenges that your projects may want to address. So you can see how this step one, really understanding those boundaries and what the issues are, is going to be really important, because when you go into step two and think about selecting projects, you're gonna want to know what those projects should address. So again, this is just an example of how having that grounding and what the issues and priorities are is really important, and what it looks like. And although it does sound simple, in reality, in many instances is a bit more complex, because you may depend on water that is generated, hundreds of miles away from you in other basins and transferred to your location of use. So like the case of Mexico City. So anyway, this is just an illustrative example of some of the things that you'd be thinking about as part of step one. With that, I wanted to hand it over to Laura so you can talk us through step two.
Great. Thanks so much, Paul and Mark, for setting up the foundation of VWBA2. And with this step one, as Paul reiterated, it's foundational. It might seem simple, but it's so important. And so moving on to step two is, once you have an understanding of that catchment context, to drill down deeper and identify specific potential project activities and partners that can help do that work. And so I'm going to walk through the sub steps within two. And the first one is thinking about company goals. And VWBs are typically used to track and communicate progress against either enterprise or site volumetric water goals or other types of enterprise goals. And so it's really important that companies pay special attention to how and where the VWBs will be generated. That will ensure that the type, timing, and location of those volumetric benefits and any claims are closely aligned with those goals. And this really helps ensure the credibility of a program. So when we think about goals, there's two important considerations. The first is, what is the desired outcome of a company's goal? And we've got a couple of examples here. One might be quite familiar for many water stewardship programs where there's a balance, an aim to balance the water withdrawals or consumptions compared to from a company's sites, suppliers, or consumers up and down the value chain, or perhaps just focus on that operational water use. And these are often called restoration or replenish goals, essentially replenishing more water than is used by the company in a certain basin. Another type of goal that might apply is looking at a company's impacts on water availability within a catchment, certain sustainability thresholds. So it's not always a replenish goal. There could be other types of goals that set the foundation of what is that outcome one wants to achieve. And then the second part of it is to look at what is the geographic scope that's relevant. And in this case, goals really should specify the type in what geography that those volumetric benefits should be delivered. And a couple examples might be if a company is focusing on addressing risks, you would want to make sure those VWBs are generated in areas that are relevant to the water footprint within the value chain. Or if a company is focused more on their impacts, those VWBs might be relevant to a catchment that's hydrologically connected in areas that could be affected by the company. And so it's important to set the stage and make sure that there's strong alignment with the goals. Next slide. So once there's been an understanding of the goals that relate to the effort being done by the company and understanding local context, a company should identify and evaluate which projects align with both the goals and also the local needs and the shared water challenges. These activities might be driven by public, private, indigenous, or nonprofit implementers. And the activities should have the potential to address the shared water challenges that are relevant and, if possible, align with existing efforts that are already in place to address these water issues. It's important to coordinate with reputable and experienced implementing partners, and this can often improve the likelihood of success of a project. So the table shown here is from the executive summary of VWBA 2.0. It includes a pretty comprehensive list of different water stewardship activity classifications: agriculture, demand management, gray or green infrastructure, land conservation, restoration, and water sanitation, access and hygiene, so WASH type projects. So within those 5 big buckets are a large number of different activities. This is by no means a comprehensive list of the only activities that could apply through VWBA, but this gives you a sense of the variety, just like with VWBA 1, that can be handled using this framework for quantification. And there's a little more detail as you dig into the guidance, especially a more expanded table that goes beyond this that can be a good reference. Next slide. So next, in step 2.3, after identifying a preliminary set of potential activities that might be suitable and partners, we guide you to use a decision framework to evaluate the project eligibility and selection considerations. So in essence, what makes it a good applicable project for quantification of VWBs? And you can see there's a flow chart on the left that's the decision-making process. On the right, we have a list of 6 eligibility criteria, and these are the must-haves that should really be in place to generate a quantifiable volumetric benefit. Intentionally, these requirements are not focused on how to do a claim, but more how to quantify that benefit. And the claim element is covered in step 6 later on in the resource. So these eligibility criteria will help a practitioner select relevant projects, make sure they're in line with these best practices that really in the water stewardship community have been followed for about 2 decades and are currently reflected in many ongoing water stewardship programs. So when we look at these criteria, they include making sure there's an established pathway to produce a VWB. So is there an appropriate method and indicator that's scientifically sound to do that calculation? What we touched on before, does this activity address shared water challenges that are relevant to the catchment or the area of interest, the community? Criterion 3 is making sure that there's internal buy-in and general support from external parties to make sure that this is a very welcomed project in the region, and both internal and external resources feel that way. 4 is, does the project deliver change that goes beyond the without project conditions? So will that activity go from the current state to an improved state? That project wouldn't have happened without, or that improvement wouldn't have happened without the project. Another important element is that this project should not be legally required by the project sponsor or the corporate funder for compliance purposes. Number 5 is there an established pathway to track the VWBs, either a modeling or monitoring effort that can be conducted? And then finally, 6, it's important to think about trade-offs. So have important trade-offs related to the project been assessed, understood, and minimized if possible? As the decision tree shows, if all of these criteria are not met through the first pass when looking at this, we do recommend that there's an opportunity to engage with the project implementer, revisit the project, see if there's a perhaps say expand data collection, whatever might be needed, and then determine if indeed it could be an eligible activity. Next slide. So the second part of step 2.3, going beyond eligibility criteria, we've provided a set of project selection considerations. And these can help practitioners rank, select, and really find those best fit projects for the programs in the region. And with a few of these, or even many of these considerations in place, there's a greater likelihood that the project will be successful and hopefully contribute to broader social, economic, environmental outcomes, impacts. It'll also help ensure that there's value in the project and success, but it's important to note that these are optional considerations. They're not necessarily required in our mind, but if some of them are captured in the project, it's really a good chance to maybe elevate the priority of investing in that project. So in short, some of these include minimizing the risk of project failure, looking at the readiness of the implementer, getting it started, making sure there's clarity on costs and investments among funders, a feasible project implementation timeline. Is the duration of volumetric benefits consistent with what the corporate is looking for? Is confirming the location is relevant to the goals? And then another really interesting element is, are there multiple benefits, perhaps water quality or biodiversity benefits that may be achieved through this project? Is it a project that can be enabling and help unlock funding or help scale to larger impact? Are there innovative solutions, either financing or technologies that are involved? And then finally, is there an opportunity for collaboration? So really a wide range of different considerations that are worth looking at and seeing when selecting a project, where are these kind of plus ones that can be considered? I will note that all of these criteria and considerations are, it's really, how they're implemented and reviewed is really needing to be taken on by the individual company in their own decision-making process. So though they're fairly prescriptive, there is flexibility and importance on the company to interpret these and to use it in their own project selection process. So that's the gist of step 2. What I'd like to do in the next few minutes is build on the baseline example that Paul presented in Mexico City, when we looked at these 3 different basins that had a mix of water quality and water availability or scarcity challenge, and step through what that might look like for step 2 in VWBA. And so when we look at these 3 basins, as Paul introduced them, if we looked at the Cutzamala Basin, as he noted, there's water quality challenges. So examples of a particular project aim might be to improve water quality by reducing TDS in local waterways. When we look at the Lerma Basin, perhaps improving the water availability by increasing groundwater recharge or reducing agricultural water withdrawals. And then local to the site in Mexico City, thinking about improving water availability by increasing groundwater recharge, which is really an important resource locally, or reducing local agricultural withdrawals, and perhaps looking at stormwater management. So as you can see, kind of that getting into step two, it's important to then say, okay, well, where would we like to go with certain project opportunities, maybe on a broad level? And what I'd like to do now is step through two of these project aim ideas in a little more detail. So if we start with the Lerma Basin example, to illustrate, we're looking at a company that has a corporate volumetric benefit goal, or volumetric goal, to replenish 100% of their operational consumption, and the company sources water, as Paul noted, within the Lerma Basin. So it's very relevant to act in that basin. There's a strong linkage, and we're going to look at that aim to improve water availability by increasing groundwater recharge and reducing withdrawals from agriculture. And so in step 2.2, looking at different project and partner opportunities, there's a couple of options that might present to look at agricultural best management practices and also looking at reducing agricultural demand. So landing on an specific activity that's focused on irrigation efficiency and modernization seems like a good choice for this area and for this for the local region and also for the corporate sponsor. Next slide. So looking through the 6 criteria, and we can step through these. So a quantifiable volumetric benefit, we can confirm that looking at this type of activity, we would use the reduced withdrawal or consumption methods as documented in VWBA 2.0. We've confirmed that this is very relevant for the shared water challenge of aquifer depletion that's driven by excess water withdrawals, primarily for irrigation. There can be a note that there's buy-in and general support from farmers and irrigation districts and the surrounding communities that this would be a beneficial activity all around. There's also confirmation that it's a voluntary action, that local farmers are not required to improve their infrastructure technologies, but it's an opportunity that goes beyond perhaps any regulation. There's a pathway to track the volumetric benefit. In this case, given the solution, a direct measurement of the irrigation water that's applied is possible due to monitoring that's either in place or perhaps going to be implemented as part of the project. And as far as trade-offs, there weren't any concerns. The changes in return flows and crop yields and energy consumption have all been assessed, and it did not appear to be any potential negative consequences from those. So in this case, there was a really good confirmation of all of these important criteria, and thinking about those other optional considerations in the project that might really help elevate this project to the top. We found that there was a implementer readiness and capacity to get going, a feasible implementation timeline that aligns really well with the next growing season. There were some innovative technologies for efficient irrigation that are novel and a really good chance to test those out. And then an opportunity to scale to additional farms and within the region, and perhaps inviting additional corporate sponsorship. So again, kind of a quick illustration of one case. And I want to take a few minutes and look at a second one. And this one is shifting to the Valley of Mexico example. Again, same corporate entity with the same volumetric replenish goal and sources water from this basin as well locally. The project aim here is, again, to improve water availability by increasing recharge or agricultural withdrawals, or focusing on stormwater management. And so, so step 2.1 lines up really well. For step 2, investigation of different project types might include domestic and industrial demand management or gray infrastructure, and specific activities focused on urban stormwater capture and groundwater recharge from that capture of stormwater, and then also industrial park leak detection and repair. And so I'm going to focus on that opportunity to do stormwater capture and groundwater recharge, and take a look at the eligibility criteria. Next slide. So in this case, yes, a quantifiable volumetric benefit for stormwater capture and recharge is very, very straightforward, using the increased recharge indicator and recharge method as documented in VWBA. Relevant water challenge, yes, aquifer depletion is an issue due to excess withdrawal from industry, domestic withdrawals, and there's also localized flooding from poor stormwater management. So it's really 2 different challenges that are being addressed here. Strong support from municipality and local community groups to implement this project. It's also confirmed to be a voluntary action. The municipality is not required to do this specific project implementation, but it will help reduce local flooding and help recharge that local aquifer. As far as the pathway to track the VWBs, that would be using modeled estimate of volume of water captured based on precipitation and other data inputs, and then also calculate what the estimated recharge would be for a given situation. The trade-offs were considered, and though public land would be required to implement the project, there was no major impact anticipated for the community to do that. When we also look at other considerations that might be relevant, we found there's a minimal risk of failure given the project design that's been vetted previously. There's strong clarity on the project costs across different funding sources. There's a feasible implementation timeline to get it in place that's aligned with what the corporate is looking for with their program, and also a desirable duration of benefits. Given that this is a pretty long-term solution that would be in place, the benefits should be generated over multiple years. And also some multiple benefits that would be realized through the project that could include increased ecological benefits in the recharge basin, and also some improvement in water quality by reducing that stormwater runoff. So, as you can see, very, in our minds, very logical checklist, reasonable eligibility criteria that an organization could work through with any opportunity that's that they're evaluating as part of their program. So that is the end of step 2. And I know as we teed up, we're not getting through the whole guidance in this webinar, but hopefully that was good foundational information, and hopefully the examples provided some clarity. And I will hand it back over to Mark to lead us in the Q&A.
Right. Thank you so much, Laura and Paul. And thank you everyone for putting your comments and questions in the chat. I'd like to start off just with a question coming from Colin, who asks, and kind of follow up, in Mexico, the water law allocates volumes of water under a use it or lose it logic. In the example that was presented by Laura, how can you ensure that the water saving in agriculture at the project level actually translates into a real saving, and not just that the water saved in plot A is instead used in plot B outside the project? So yeah, Laura and Paul, please feel free to
I'm actually going to
share your
defer to
thoughts.
Paul because I know
Yeah.
you're quite familiar with this specific project. So
Yeah, I mean that's a question, a very common question that we've gotten over the years. Even I remember when we did the first version of VWBA, right? What happens to that saved water? Is it really, does it go back to the aquifer? Does it stay in the basin, or is it reallocated? And I'll provide an answer, and then I'd welcome Todd. I saw you went off camera or on camera, and Laura to weigh in. Look, at the end of the day, I think our ability to do that relies heavily on the selection of trusted and credible partners that understand the local regulatory context and what's possible within the context of the basin. There's certain things that project implementers don't have control over, right? And we recognize that they're just certain things we can't control, but what's within the sphere of influence of a project developer and partners locally, which typically work in coalitions with multiple actors involved, there's typically an understanding up front that the desired outcome of these initiatives is really to build resiliency. So many farmers and implementers on the ground understand that it's in everyone's best interest, right, that those savings really remain in the basin or in the aquifer as much as possible, and that the savings should not be reallocated to other plots within a farm or to adjacent farms. So I guess, Colin, just to answer directly, I think, I would say you avoid that by working with really trusted partners that have a proven track record working within that sector on the ground with those actors that understand these issues and that understand your objectives around building resiliency in the basin. That's the best way to avoid things like that. But I don't know, Todd, I know you have firsthand experience with many of these things. Anything you want to add?
I think it's a great answer, Paul. It's also a fabulous question that's probably important across almost every project out there. But the other point is, what are the shared water challenges that you're trying to alleviate, right? In some cases, it may be allocating more water in streams and protecting it for wetland or wildlife benefit, in which case you must have those protection mechanisms. In other cases, it may be making water increasingly more available for agriculture to support community, benefits and economic development. And so those would require very different solutions. And Paul's exactly right. Collaborating with local stakeholders, policymakers to understand precisely what's trying to be achieved, and either ensuring that mechanisms are in place to achieve that, or that your project and the outputs that it creates are generating those social benefits that address the shared water challenges that are relevant to that local community. It very well could be in the Mexico case study that making water available for the next 50 communities downstream from the aquifer is a key component of the shared water challenge that you're trying to address.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Paul and Todd Reeve, Todd, CEO of the Bonneville Environmental Foundation. We have some other questions coming in, and I'd like to turn to Jose's question, which reads, are VWBAs and WQBAs, which is a sister publication also that was released, more relevant to outside the fence projects? For inside the fence projects or activities, sometimes it's trickier to find the rational argument to propose VWB claims.
I can take that. As I mentioned in the really aligning with a company's goal is a key step to this, and understanding what is framing the driver for investing in the project. And we think about something, a commonly aligned goal structure is a replenish goal, where a company might replenish a volume of water that's consistent with their operational water use or their supply chain water use. Best practice is that these goals are not met by changes in the operational water balance, or by doing on-site projects, but more, yes, those efficiencies can come in place to really reduce the target. And then the VWB related activities tend to be outside the fence line. That's the most common way VWBs have been implemented. I think given a company's particular goal structure, that could change. If their goal is compounded to say, we want to meet a general volumetric target with both fence efficiency activities and outside the fence line operations, it could apply there to in the fence line activities. So my thought, and I'm interested to hear what Paul says as well, is going back to the driver for the why VWBA is being calculated and the foundation of the program and the goal. That's what should be reviewed, and the nuances of that to understand whether inside the fence act activities would be applicable for that program. I'll hand it to you, Paul, if you have anything to add.
I think you covered it really well, Laura. Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. We have some other questions here. One that has come up during our development for the guidance is around kind of compliance and how that relates to the eligibility criteria. So Varun writes, in VWBA 2.0, requirement number 4 states that to be accredited, a water saving activity must be not legally required. Could you clarify how this applies in cases where a project is implemented before a legal requirement takes effect?
So the project would be implemented, say, in year 2022, and perhaps it was generated benefits, but then a legal requirement came in place 5 years later. I think that's perhaps what they're asking. I think that relates to something really that comes out later in the VWBA documentation, which is when to start claiming VWBs and when to stop, and the duration of benefit. Typically, as noted in that criteria, the idea is the project sponsor who's funding it and wanting to claim this voluntary action. It shouldn't be something that they're legally required to do on site. So that's kind of the first way to look at this. Now, I personally haven't come across any situations where a project was in place and maybe anticipating like a 10-year duration benefit, and halfway through there was a regulatory requirement to say, well, you needed to do this anyway. So that's, to me, a new programmatic interpretation that I think should be thought through carefully. And in my mind, the volumetric benefit did occur, But the question is whether or not the company would want to continue to report that against their claims once that legal requirement has sort of superseded the voluntary focus of the project. And I'll open it up to Paul or Todd if they have any counterpoints or any additional thoughts.
I think you covered it well. The point around compliance is that the guidance recommends that actions that are required to comply with regulation by the project sponsor shouldn't qualify, right? And the reason there is because we want to ensure additionality, right, beyond what would have happened otherwise. So I think that's just very important to keep in mind. It's the perspective of the project sponsor that this is applying to. I haven't seen any instance where a voluntary action over the course of the project life cycle has then been mandated or regulated, but
Yeah.
I'm sure that could happen.
And just to clarify, when we say project sponsor, we mean essentially the corporate funder,
Yeah.
not the location where the project is being implemented. So two different parties. It's that external funding that's coming in to help support the implementation of the project.
Excellent. Thank you. I told you we'd be getting into the details and technicalities here. We have a question coming from Cora, who writes, if a municipality upstream of us is in violation of their permit requirements for water quality, but has no funding to address this, would supporting them in this project not be eligible because it is not strictly voluntary? Sorry, I just lost it.
Yeah, it just
Even if
disappeared.
solving the problem, even if solving the problem wouldn't happen without VWBA funding support.
I think,
Go ahead.
I mean, it's a great question, and we've seen a number of successful coalitions help solve problems similar to the ones you're describing. If a municipality is not in compliance with a certain water quality standard and there's a known funding gap, and a company downstream helps close that funding gap, that project does drive additionality beyond a business as usual scenario, and therefore those volumetric benefits resulting from that intervention could be claimed by the company supporting that. I think this is an example of where we distinguish compliance by a corporate sponsor versus compliance by another actor in the basin. There have been a number of successful initiatives that have helped bring in private sector capital to close public sector financing gaps to achieve water quality compliance. So yeah, it is where I hope that answers. I don't know, Laura, if you want to add.
I agree totally. I think it's a very a potentially applicable opportunity for volumetric benefit. And I'm just reading from our guidance here. If the project is legally required by the site owner, but you can document the reasons why compliance would not have been possible without the support of the project sponsor, so the corporate funder, or why the proposed activity provides value beyond the legal requirement, so maybe going above a regulation. Those are cases where it is possible, because as Paul said, the money's not there to do it, even though it is required by that implementing entity. It wouldn't have happened anyway without the support from the project sponsor.
Excellent. Thank you. We have a lot of questions on a kind of legal compliance, some on additionality, but I want to ask one from Lisa, who I think we will definitely address this in later webinars. But she asked, could you elaborate on how VWA 2.0 plans to attribute volumetric water benefits to corporate funders who provide upfront capital for land acquisition, especially in cases where restoration outcomes and water benefits are realized over time through revolving fund mechanisms? Will there be standardized principles or tracking methods to ensure these funders receive credible and proportional VWB claims? So Paul or even Todd, if you have thoughts on response here.
I can kick it off. I think that the intention is always that, yes, companies that provide early capital, should be recognized for outcomes and outputs that are achieved later on. I think the key question is the kind of level of transparency and traceability of inputs into that activity or that investment process, the number of parties involved, the types of activities all play a huge role in the degree to which you can do that level of attribution. I think the aspiration of the project team is that we say yes. We were very, very supportive of recognizing early funders and catalytic funders. The reality is, it really comes down to the timelines, the pathways, the number of funders and numbers of activities and degree of traceability and clarity to be able to attribute in a credible and transparent way. And I think that's very project or initiative based. Todd and Laura.
No way I could have said it better, Paul.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think some of the guidance related to attribution of benefits and when to claim and how to claim that is a little more fleshed out in the later steps of VWBA 2.0. So I think in the item, a little teaser to join the next webinars there. I think we'll be hitting those topics a little more directly, but I'll just reiterate what Paul said about transparency. And I think that is one of those consideration elements that I noted of, is there really good information on, and at least a willingness to have transparency to understand the various contributors to the project, the individual payments that are being made and for what. So these are tricky projects and they're exciting projects because they're scalable, multiple parties involved, really good stuff. And it's a little bit of new territory. We feel that the guidance is strong enough to help the right parties in the room interpret how they need to talk to each other and ask the right questions so that there's a level of trust and fairness when it comes to how to allocate the various benefits across multiple parties. But so we think the foundational principles are there. Now it's going to be nuanced for each application. So we tried not to go too far with the guidance and get too specific because there's no way we could have covered every type of opportunity or situation that might come up.
Absolutely. Or if we did that, it would be such a massive document. And we continue
700
to expand
pages long, right? Yeah,
exactly.
we didn't want to give everybody a 700-page document. We stuck with, I think it's 72 pages. So yeah.
That's right. Laura, it's maybe we want to stick with you if you don't mind. We had a comment here on or a question around additionality, and I just wanted to read in, maybe get your thoughts to expand upon it. So this is coming from Ava, who's is bringing experience coming from the carbon credit space. So could you please elaborate more on whether additionality is required of projects voluntarily aligned to VWBA 2.0? Coming from the soil carbon space where additionality is always discussed, and as we start developing water as a co-benefit to our carbon programs, I'm trying to determine whether we need to demonstrate additionality to make defensible claims. My understanding is that all volumetric water benefit accounting, regardless of the underlying model, requires additionality via the activities spelled out, like in Table 1, like the agricultural best management practices. Any further thoughts from Laura or Paul or others?
Yeah, I would say yes on additionality. And that really hits to criterion number 4, that the project wouldn't have happened otherwise without the project sponsor getting involved and also the not being legally required. As far as a project that has carbon benefits, and you think, oh, can we also claim water benefits? I think there's a lot of opportunity. There could be. I think that's a topic that we'll continue to explore when we want to make sure that there's good intersection between carbon and water, the carbon and water space. Geography plays a role in there. There's some other nuances to consider and timelines, but if there's say a reforestation project that's really been implemented for carbon purpose, for a carbon program, and it's a voluntary action, and there's water related benefits with reduced runoff. I think there is opportunity to look at both sets of benefits. It's not double counting. You can have carbon benefits and water benefits. So I don't know if that helps answer that a little bit more in that specific case.
I think one thing I would add, I completely agree with Laura. The way that we've been talking about it with the project team, and there have been a number of instances where we've been asked this question, is like Laura said, we want to see additionality, but in the case of carbon markets or stacked benefits, we want to see intentionality, right? So if you want to claim the water benefit, that has to be clearly articulated up front in your contractual agreement with the off-taker and the implementer to demonstrate that there was intentionality to achieve a water outcome tied to a shared challenge if you're going to claim that benefit. What we recommend against is doing a project driven by carbon benefits with off-takers that want carbon benefits, and then once the activity is complete, realize that there is some water benefit and go back and quantify that and commercialize that on top of the carbon benefit, just because there was no intentionality or purpose driving that outcome from the beginning, and therefore it should not be claimed as such. But we recognize that that's extremely complex as well. And therefore, at the end of the day, the decision's really going to come down to the specifics of the project and those participating.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul and Laura. I just wanted to raise one more question, get your thoughts on here. This is coming from Daniel. So regarding step 1, around the phrase shared water challenges is often repeated, but it's not clear whether it implies that the project must be developed in catchments where the company or its supply chain is actually located. And there's further guidance that we have in the first box there that states company interactions with water in that catchment, which suggests a physical interaction. Can projects only be carried out in catchments where the company or its supply chain is located?
I think Laura touched on this in step 2. It's really thinking about, how does the project align with the company's objectives? And those objectives are often tied to targets or goals or programs. So it really depends on what the company is trying to achieve, right? Most of the time, companies' commitments or targets are tied to their physical presence in a certain basin directly because they have an owned and operated asset, or indirectly because they have a supplier or a consumer market in that watershed. That is the most common scenario. But that does not mean that a company can't commit to, investing in a meaningful way in a water stress basin where they don't have a physical presence, right? I would just go back to Laura's kind of section of step 2, where it clearly articulates alignment with company objectives.
I agree. We work with a food and beverage company with their corporate, their water stewardship goal is not just focused on their operational water use, but actually looking at their supply chain water use, and they source various products from their supply chain. And so some of the projects that we evaluate for them using VWBA are indeed areas where they're located in those areas where they're sourcing their products that they're selling through their business. So I think it's very possible to do that. And again, just always thinking about the goal driving why that activity is taking place and making sure it's logical and there's linkage and there's material connection to it.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul and Laura. I lied. I have one more question. We have some time left. Jonathan writes in, so beyond social benefits and sustainability, what is fundamentally driving companies to invest in these types of projects and undertake a VWA process? So can these benefits be commercialized? I know we've had some discussions on kind of the other kind of market-based approaches for this, but any thoughts on responding to this question?
Laura, go for it.
Oh boy. I think the drivers for many companies to get involved in water stewardship is really focused on their risk. Either it's operational risk or it could be also reputational risk or regulatory risk. So those are our primary reasons why a company gets involved. As far as market-based opportunities, that's a topic that we've discussed a lot as a project team. The principles of VWBA and really best practice and a lot of the work in the water space for the last few decades have not focused on the market-based approaches, but rather more of a, I guess, a flexible approach driven by, I don't really know how to say it, but different drivers in the process, and not feeling that the market-based approach is really what's the best. So I'm going to hand that to Paul and Todd because they may have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I mean the driver for engaging is risk management and contributions to building resiliency. That your question around commercialization, I would say commercialization by whom? It's different if you're a solution provider and your solution's generating water outcomes. You could potentially commercialize those by engaging corporates to help pay for that. I don't think corporations have an interest in commercializing and transacting the volumetric benefits that they've generated in the open marketplace. Like Laura said, there's no appetite and there's a lot of risk in doing that. And so I think it's kind of we need to better understand the context of that second question. Todd, I saw you want to chime in.
Yeah, we have worked with companies that have sought to achieve volumetric benefits by commercializing technology or systems that they develop with the intent to ultimately market and sale. It has been those are in cases where, at least in our experience, where there's been a significant water footprint and a clearly described target in addition to that commercialization objective. I think it's an interesting question, and from my perspective, there haven't been enough scenarios of that playing out to kind of understand the pros and cons and or the sort of cross purposes related to that. But it's a great one to think about. In the case that I'm describing, the commercialization component was not successful, and the volumetric piece was not successful in addition.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Todd, Laura, and Paul. There's a lot of great questions, a lot of discussion already. We'll try to address the questions we were able to get to during this session, but please keep them coming. And I would like to, again, acknowledge and thank our corporate sponsors for the publication of VWBA 2.0. Again, this was you can find the publication across the different partners' websites. And this is the first installment there's going to be 2 additional installments coming up later on November 4th, one at the same time, same channel, and then on December 2nd, also at the same time. So thank you everyone for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day or evening, wherever you're located. Thank you, everyone.